Many honourable and right honourable members will lay claim, I'm sure, to their constituencies being constituencies of two halves or numerous parochial parts. I am another in that respect, and Batley and Spen is very much that kind of constituency, and it's a joy to represent such a diverse community. Batley and Spen is a gathering of typically independent, no-nonsense, proud Yorkshire towns and villages. Our communities have been deeply enhanced by immigration, be it Irish Catholics across the constituency or Muslims from Indian Gujarat or Pakistan, principally from Kashmir. And whilst we celebrate our diversity, the thing that surprises me time and time again as I travel around the constituency is that we are far more united and have far more in common than that which divides us. My constituency is also home to Fox's Biscuits and Lion Confectionery. So I'm sure you will not think it an indulgence, Mr. Speaker, if I describe Batley and Spen as a constituency with an industrial heart wrapped in a very rich and pleasant Yorkshire landscape, geographical, historical and cultural. The spirit of non-conformity is as prevalent now in my part of West Yorkshire as it was in the time of my two immediate predecessors, Mike Wood and Elizabeth Peacock. They were both known for their own brand of independent, non-conformist service, albeit in very different ways. And I intend to maintain that established tradition in my own unique style.
Welcome to The Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore. It is Saturday, August the 1st, 2020. The voice you heard was Jo Cox, a member of Parliament in the United Kingdom. Her district was Batley and Spen in West Yorkshire. This one hurts because Jo Cox, for those of you in the United Kingdom know very well, was murdered on June the 16th, 2016. 2016 was a very strange, bewildering year, and I think you know why. Certainly one of the events that happened that year. This was something that shocked the United Kingdom, saddened all of us. I remember hearing about Jo Cox. She was just 41 years of age, a member of Parliament, and you heard her there in the House of Commons, her first speech, her maiden speech, and you can see that actually on YouTube. Jo Cox was someone who was a dedicated politician to her constituents. She really did believe in serving them, not in serving herself. Jo Cox was somebody who dedicated her time in public service to making the community that she represented a better place, and to making the country that she lived in and served a better place. You heard it from her right there. I could have started this episode very differently. I could have started with the news that she had passed. I could have started with some tribute to her. I could have started with the police officer at a press conference talking about her. But I started with Jo Cox today on this first day of August because A, she should not be forgotten, and what she did in her brief time as a member of Parliament should not be forgotten. And what really prompted me to start with Jo Cox today was the subject matter that I'm going to be talking about a bit, which is the far right. Turns out that the man who murdered her was a far right-wing racist, of course, because that's really what far right-wing is. I really wish that people would stop using that term, and like I just used it, right? But was a racist, white, violent man. A violent white man who murdered her. And what I want to talk about is this here I go again, this extremist and racist fervor that has not really left any part of this planet. We've had World War II. We've had World War II. But what you find is that you have to constantly fight these battles. You cannot just rest on your laurels. Sadly, all over the world, politicians' lives are taken. Sadly, all over the world, this happens. Olof Palme from Norway years ago, I believe he was the prime minister or the mayor of that country, or the prime minister of that country. Or was that Sweden? I forget. I think it was Norway. You know, we had Yitzhak Rabin, also someone killed by forces that were extremist and violent, obviously. And we can go back further, much further than that in history. But this extremist and racist band of individuals has lingered and hung around and dug in, and they are becoming more emboldened and more emphatic, and they have integrated themselves, deeply embedded themselves for centuries into the system. They are part of the system. And that's my focus today. You know, there's going to be a couple of things that I want to really say and convey, because we are living in those times again. And like I said, we've always really been living in those times. What's happened is that these extremists, these racists, are replotting and replanning and biding their time and waiting for the right time, the right moment. And it's very clear now, not just in 2016, as I wanted to play that piece of sound from Jo Cox, that she represented the best of what humanity can offer and what humanity does offer, more often than not. But it's also a call to us, particularly now with the passing of John Lewis. Are we prepared to offer the best of ourselves? How many of us are prepared to offer the best of ourselves as we see this extremism, as we see this racism and misogyny and this Islamophobia and this transphobia and homophobia? Are we, whether here in the US or anywhere else in the world, are we going to offer the best of ourselves? When I return, a couple of real life examples of the extremism that really is here. This is no performance. People have to stop saying that. This is not a drill. Welcome back. Katrin Benhold of the New York Times. She is the bureau chief in Berlin, Germany, and has lately, and certainly in the month of July, done some really important reporting about the rise again of Nazis in Germany. I won't even call them neo. Neo means new, right? But they're Nazis, whether they're new or old, whether they're 20 or whether they are 95, they are Nazis. So I'm going to drop the neo because language is really important in this world. And that's something that I have believed in forever. How we define, how we explain, how we speak about things, particularly as it pertains to issues like the ones that I am covering and talking about here, mean everything. We have to define things before we talk about them, and we cannot take for granted that everybody knows what we're talking about, which is why communication is essential. We need to define what we are speaking of before we talk about it. And I think that that is critical. Even if we already think we know what it means, even if we do know what it means, I think it's important to do that, to explain, to lay boundaries down, to lay down the parameters. Very, very important. So Katrin Benhold, her last name is Benhold. She is the New York Times Berlin bureau chief. And last month, she did two very important stories about Germany and about Nazis that are infiltrating the military in Germany. And the relatively slow response from the authorities in Germany. This is under Angela Merkel, who is the Chancellor of Germany. She's going to be stepping down, I think, from party leadership and from the chancellorship next year, 2021, though she will still be active in politics. She just will not be the leader of her party and the leader in the Chancellor of Germany. And she announced that, I think, last year, if not the year before. Angela Merkel has had to balance a tightrope, to say the least, in Germany. She has allowed many different immigrant groups into the country. She took on the bulk of the refugees from Syria, and you had racists in Germany, white people in Germany, racists in Germany, who many of whom were actively opposed to Merkel. And Merkel suffered some defeats in some of the elections in her party. The AfD, if I hope I'm not mistaken, I want to make sure I get this right. There is a party, now the AfD maybe I don't want to get this wrong. But there is a group in Germany. It may have been the AfD, and the AfD might be in Holland. But I think the AfD is in Germany. And the AfD, or whomever it was a racist group, extremist group, racist group, gained seats in the German parliament as a result of a racist response to Angela Merkel saying, "Come on in, you're welcome here. We will have you here." Opening up humanity, right? That's a human thing to do. And if you're a Christian, that's a Christian-like thing to do. You clothed me when I was naked. You fed me when I was hungry. You healed me when I was sick. These are things that are in the Christian tenets, right? I don't want to get into religion here, but I'm just saying that is what you do. You extend humanity, and I'll take Christianity and put it aside for a second. I'm just talking as a human being. You extend the best of yourself to others. no matter how much you have or don't have, if there's a little something you can do to make somebody's world a little brighter, whether it's a smile, whether it is giving them a little bit of your spare change, whether it is saying hello to them and acknowledging them and acknowledging their presence and their humanity, if you can do that, you are doing something. Too many of us walk past that person sitting on the sidewalk, walk past that person lying on the street. It's so easy, isn't it, to just ignore and pretend and put on your tunnel vision and just not look left, not look right, not look behind you. It's very easy to do. We all do it, don't we? But Angela Merkel said, I'm going to open up these shores. There's going to be a few, maybe 2 million, 3 million, whatever it was, many Syrian refugees and others that she allowed in. They were running from persecution, these refugees. And so Angela Merkel saw fit to do something that some of the other countries wouldn't do or wouldn't do enough of. And so you have the racists in Germany who are racist against black people, certainly the anti-blackness. To hear of the German chapter of Black Lives Matter, they make it very clear that this kind of racism in Germany continues. This didn't stop after Hitler was defeated. So Merkel did that, and you had this racist response to it, hateful response, in some cases violent response. You have seen this. And these articles that Katrin Benhold has written in the New York Times, July 1st, Germany disbands special forces tainted by far-right extremists. There's a special forces group that Germany, the German government, had to eliminate. Why? Because there were so many racists in that group who were violent extremists, who were actually doing some unholy things, turning on members of the forces and the government there. I mean, this was insurrection. And you had a politician killed by one of these people. Neo-Nazis seed military ranks. Let me read that again. This is another one. This is another one from Katrin Benhold, July 3rd, 2020. New York Times. Title, As Neo-Nazis Seed Military Ranks, Germany Confronts an Enemy Within. Nazis in the military in Germany. And then today, August 1st, 2020, in the New York Times from Katrin Benhold. Lengthy article here that I think you should read. You should read all three of these. This one today is called Body Bags and Enemy Lists. How far-right police officers and ex-soldiers planned for Day X. Germany, and the subtitle, Germany has woken up to a problem of far-right extremism in its elite special forces, but the threat of neo-Nazi infiltration of state institutions is much broader. I strongly encourage you, and I'm going to put a link to this particular article, this most recent one today, from Katrin Benhold. And I would certainly would like to be able to speak to her, because I think that she, and talk to her about this and do my own research on it, but also talk to her because she is out in Berlin. She is a German native. She's somebody who knows Germany obviously inside and out. Certainly better than someone like myself. I took German in school in England. That's about as much as I know about Germany, and since I can only count in German these days, that's not a whole heck of a lot of knowledge. And say a few things like Ich bin sprechen eigentlich Deutsch. But this is serious stuff. And I mentioned these 3 articles to you because the same newspaper, a newspaper that I've had my moments talking about, to say the least, the New York Times, had in its pages on May the 24th, 2020, the following title of an editorial: Why does the U.S. military celebrate white supremacy? I'm holding this editorial in my hand here, and it's a single page, a full entire. Actually, it's a double page. It's a whole complete page, I should say. And in the middle of the page, there is a bullet, a drawing of a bullet with 2 holes in it, 2 black holes in it. And it's meant to resemble a Klan hood. It's a really good editorial. I really do advise you to read that online if you can. It's called Why Does the U.S. Military Celebrate White Supremacy? And again, I have a problem with that term, supremacy, because there's nothing supreme about what these individuals do. They are killers, they are murderers, they are very dangerous people. And when you say supremacy, what you are doing is using their language to define and describe them, which I think is a real problem and is dangerous. Do not adopt the language of the killers. That is not the way to go. These are white racists. And I think that it's important to keep saying that instead of softening this with supremacy. Supreme to whom? Who are they supreme to? They're not supreme to me. Are they supreme to you? There's nothing supreme about them. Maybe the title of the editorial should have been, Why Does the U.S. Military Celebrate White Racists? Maybe the editorial's title should have been, Why Does the U.S. Military Celebrate Anti-Blackness? Maybe the title of the editorial should be, Why does the U.S. military celebrate white violence? I mean, that is about what I'm talking about when I say language is important. Maybe you could have said in that title editorial, it could have been something to the effect of, well, why do we still have Confederate monuments in this country that this country celebrates? That we still have military bases named after the people who lost, named after the racists and enslavers. That's the kind of country we are living in now. That's the country we've always lived in here before it was taken from after it was taken from the Native Americans by force, and you had Native Americans genocided. I mentioned this, by the way, and I'm not detouring at all. When I mentioned that New York Times article from May the 24th, 2020 as an editorial, and I've just given you the title and then the multiple titles of the other titles it really should have. None of this is in isolation, because Fort Hood, speaking of names of Confederates and people like that, Fort Hood in Texas, the military base there, has seen the deaths in the last few months, within the last few months or so, of 3 Latinx military personnel who fought for their country, who stood up for their country. And these murders took place either on the base of Fort Hood in Texas or around the base or not far from it. And all of their bodies or remains were found within a few weeks or months of each other. Is anybody looking into white racists infiltrating the military? We've known for years. And I think that editorial kind of glimpses at it, but I think it should go a lot deeper. We've known for years the military has always been, by the way, infiltrated by violent racists, by racist white men. That is not some kind of revelation here. We have seen this in the police departments all across the United States. We have these violent white men, these racist white men, infiltrating the police departments. We have this in the police, in the military here in this country. You have the Klan infiltrating these places. I dare say Klan in the FBI. I would say Klan and certainly in the military. You have this Boogaloo movement. Some of these people are affiliated with the Klan. You've got all these violent racist groups. This is not supremacy. This is violence and dominance. Ubiquity of white violence and oppression of black people and brown people. I mean, this is the way you have to start talking about these things. And these folks are not joking around here. Donald Trump is not a performer. He's a destroyer. And you have 30% of the people in this country who believe him, who hang in on his every word. %30%. 30%. I think that was the amount of people who, back in 1933 and 34, began to warm to Hitler. You had Mussolini. These aren't performers. These people are destroyers. They were destroyers. And you have what you're seeing, this infiltration in the military. You had Christopher Hassan, who, and people really have short memories in this country, who was just last year. I mean, gosh, we forget so much, don't we? We forget. Our lives are too busy. I mean, we've got so many important things in our lives that we are preoccupied with, and rightly so. Much more urgent than knowing the information that I'm about to disclose to you about these folks. But this is for awareness. This is for your conversations when you have people out there. If you dare to bother having conversations with some of the people who refuse to believe that racism exists, or that misogyny is a problem, or that the Holocaust existed and happened against Jewish people, or that enslavement ever happened. You know, you've got politicians now saying that enslaved. You see, damn it, we have to start thinking. You have politicians, Tom Cotton, senator of Arkansas, talking about, well, enslavement was a necessary evil. You don't know what this is. And then I had to hear someone on television, MSNBC, yesterday, I think Joy Reid's show, saying, well, no, I don't think fascism's here yet. It's not here yet. I mean, a white guy telling you that fascism is not here yet. And, you know, people need to study their history. Fascism's always been in the United States. What are you talking about, man? When in 1937, I believe it was, You had Nazis filling up an entire Madison Square Garden. There was a movie done on this, and I've talked about it, by Marshall Curry. He directed a 7 or 8 minute movie that was nominated for an Academy Award a few short years ago. A Night at the Garden, I believe, was the title. It's on YouTube. It's on either, forget, Vimeo, YouTube, whatever. Just go search that. A Night at the Garden. I believe it was 1937 or 38, whatever, whichever year it was. People, Nazis, filling Madison Square Garden in full regalia. I don't care whether they had the regalia on or not, but that is what happened here in the United States. Don't tell me that fascism isn't here. Don't tell me that it's not here yet, Tom Nichols. It's unbelievable. But you see, that's what happens when you deal with people in the media. Some of the people who come on these shows, they are pushing a particular agenda, and the people who invite them on, not Joy Reid, because quite frankly, let's be honest, none of these folks really have control of these shows. They may host the show. The show might be theirs in name. But if you think that they have ownership of that show and that they get to dictate what gets talked about and who gets called on, you're mistaken. Now, they may have some input, but there is a particular agenda that a network wants to present and project. And those behind the scenes of her show or any other show, I'm not picking on Joy Reid, I'm just saying in general, the directors and the producers and the owners of that network, in this case Comcast, they have an agenda. The CEO has an agenda. Of course it's making money, but there's also an ideological component to this. And it's always left to a privileged person, a privileged white person, a privileged white man to tell us, you and I, that fascism is not here yet. Oh, it's not here yet. Yeah, sure, of course. Yeah, okay. Yeah, well, maybe perhaps as a privileged white man, you wouldn't ever have reason to think that it wasn't here yet. Why didn't you ask the woman that got snatched up in New York City this week and renditioned? And they released her, these police. These plainclothes police who just threw her in a van and drove her off. I mean, what is this? You don't think that that's fascistic? They did this in Iraq. But nobody cares about Iraq because it's over there and it's those brown folk or, these people that are not white. So we don't care about you. That's what they did. Renditioning. Don't people remember that under George W., war criminal, Bush? Under his administration, that was going on. And the waterboarding was going on. People forget that. I know George W. was at John Lewis's funeral. But that doesn't mean we forget about the kind of crap that went down, to say the least, that went down in his administration. He should have been impeached. I say all of that to go back to Christopher Hassan and this infiltration, centuries long, of police departments, of military or Marine organizations, U.S. military. I mean, this has been going on forever. And it's trotted around like some precious little secret. The institutions of the country are under attack. And they are being put under attack by white racists, by violent white people. It's one thing to showcase the Klan, showcase them. And by the way, David Duke's Twitter handle and his Twitter page his account was suspended. And suspended, I mean permanently, not just suspended for a few weeks. Permanently, he's off. Probably won't stop him from going elsewhere, but he's not on Twitter. That is good news. But believe me, one person being banned from Twitter is not going to be the thing. This is a fight against people who really do mean to end this country as it presently operates. And it operates pretty badly for many of us as it is, but that does not mean we cede the country in this way. We need to make this country better. Not great again, not greater. We need to make the country better. Can we start there? Can we start with that? Better. And we need to stop saying that this is not America, because it clearly is America. We need to start saying that this is America. We need to stop saying, as some politicians are and do, this is not who we are. This is not who we are. This is exactly who we are. And as James Baldwin said, and I'm paraphrasing him, this is why we are unable, because the American public is unable to face itself, unable, the white American public. He didn't mention the word white, I did, because that's exactly who he meant. Unable to look itself in the mirror and deal with itself, deal with the history, deal with the original sins of this country, the original sin of taking Native American land by force and genociding Native Americans. That's the original sin of this country. The second original sin is the enslavement of black people. Having them work for free, for 300 plus years, and then Jim Crow, and then all of these things now, mass incarceration as written by Michelle Alexander in her book, The New Jim Crow. And the notion that enslavement ended in 1865, well, Douglas Blackmun has a lot to say about that in his book, Slavery by Another Name. And he charts up until and through World War II, enslavement continuing. Some would argue that enslavement has never ended, and that there are just different and more subtle forms of it going on in the United States, which don't literally involve shackles. But then again, if you look at the prison system, as Michelle Alexander argues, this is the new enslavement, the new Jim Crow. Mass incarceration of black people in this country. Brown people and Native Americans too, I might add. And ex-felons not being allowed to vote, and then are being allowed to vote because people have had to fight for that. And then you've got secretaries of state in Alabama, for example, who refuse to inform their own constituents, their own state, that felons, you can vote now. Even though the Republican governor, Kay Ivey, the same Kay Ivey who stood watch and basically, again, allowed an innocent young black man to be executed this year. Again, speaking of people forgetting things, Nathaniel Woods, look that name up. He was executed this year, and Kay Ivey was basically begging for it to happen. Don't believe what I say. You can go look it up. She kept appealing these stays of execution. I mean, she kept appealing and appealing. Her office appealed, and she got her wish. The Supreme Court did not want to hear anything. The execution can go ahead. Study up Nathaniel Woods. He went to his death proclaiming his innocence. And when you learn of his story, There's no way he could have done what he was accused of doing and what he was killed for by the state. Christopher Hasson, let me get back to him, was in the United States Coast Guard. Not only was he in the United States Coast Guard, and I'm connecting this back to that New York Times editorial that I was telling you about from May the 24th of this year. Why does the U.S. military celebrate white supremacy? Christopher Hasson was not only a U.S. Coast Guard, he was a U.S. Coast Guard lieutenant. This guy had a list of people he wanted to end the lives of. Many of them Democratic politicians. You can go look this up. I'm not going to go into the detail of everything. He had loads of guns, hundreds of them. The FBI raided and found all of these guns on him. This manifesto he had. He wanted to end the lives of media people in the media. He was arrested in 2019 or 18, whichever it was. He had this plot. He had a plot to do all of these things. I mean, again, he wanted to get rid of people. His manifesto said, and he's a Nazi, surprise, surprise, a racist. This is the guy who said he wanted to kill as many people as he could. And he talked about the Spanish flu. And here we are now with this Trump virus that 154,000 United States residents have died from in a 5-month period. He wrote this manifesto about all these really disgusting things. Again, I'm not going to go into any detail. Begging for race wars and all of this kind of stuff, which this Boogaloo movement is all about as well. And don't let people say, oh, well, we're on the left, and we're not right. Give me a break. They all want to kill. This is the issue. And Christopher Hasson was arrested in 2019, pled guilty to gun and drug crimes, and was sentenced this year to 13 plus years in prison. And by the way, he was never charged with a terrorism offense. Never. I don't know how you could not be charged with terroristic threats, with attempted murder, or at least conspiracy to commit murder. Well, maybe he didn't have another person to do it, but the point is that certainly at the very least terroristic threats and all this weaponry. So he's sentenced not for anything racist or anything violent or any kind of terroristic or violent threats. He's sentenced for gun crimes and drug crimes, possession and all this stuff. This guy was in the military, in the National Guard. He was in the Marine Corps. And he's not the only one. He's one of the ones that got all the attention. And then that attention drifted away. 13 years. The guy is 49 years old. He has 2 kids. These are ordinary people, These guys don't have to wear hoods. You had that guy who was, just like this guy was, a Trump supporter in Florida, sending out pipe bombs to politicians' houses sending them to media places. Remember that guy? He got arrested. His whole van was covered with stuff with Trump. I mean, this is evil stuff. And the point I'm making is I believe he was also in the military at one point or had affiliations with it. The military and the police in this country, as in Germany and elsewhere, have always been breeding grounds for this kind of thing. And it's done under the guise of the state. And because the state itself is so intertwined with this, and this is part of who they are, it makes everything more dangerous. And because the American society does not like to look at itself and celebrates Christopher Columbus, a murderer, a genocider, when they really should be celebrating Harriet Tubman, when they really should be celebrating people the likes of Rosa Parks, when they really should be celebrating Ida B. Wells. Shows you everything that you need to know about the country called the United States of America. Then you've got Wilmington, North Carolina, this year, police. Just a couple of months ago, 2 or 3 months ago, saying all these racist things while in uniform. They want to start a race war. These are uniformed cops, white male cops, talking about they want to start a race war. It's all heard. It's all caught on audio and written about. Wilmington, North Carolina. And guess which state Trump was in this week? Guess which state he was in? This stuff is not a coincidence. But some of you may remember Wilmington, North Carolina, these 3 cops, they were all fired pretty quickly, which is a good thing. Hopefully they, maybe they got paid. I'm sure they did. And they're probably going to get their pension, which, these police unions, they're very strong. Very strong. They have become a de facto government in and of themselves, quite frankly. You had these Wilmington cops saying all of these vile, racist things. And these are the people who are on the streets in your city, perhaps. This is how they think. And you want to call these folks to your house to resolve some kind of dispute or issue? When they're calling for race wars and they want to do this and do that and they say all these racist things? There's so much more of all of this. So many more stories of people like this. But there is a solution. Because every problem has a solution. And, I'll come back with what we can do about all of this. Welcome back. As I have done on this podcast and online on Twitter, and my Twitter handle at the popcorn REEL. From time to time I read out excerpts from a really important book by Milton Mayer, and his last name is Mayer. Let me say that again, Mayer. Milton Mayer. The book is called They Thought They Were Free. They Thought They Were Free. Free, and thought, Thought. Subtitle, The Germans, 1933 to 45. This is a book that I read from time to time, and I read it from time to time because it's a very important book and it's instructive. It really is instructive. And Milton Mayer had spoken to several Germans, ordinary German people. I believe all of them were men. I don't remember, as I read this, any women that he spoke to. He should have, and if I have missed this, I don't even remember, and I've read this book, so it's just inexcusable that I wouldn't remember. But principally men in this book who lived through Nazi Germany, who lived through that time in history during the 1930s and 40s. Now, he did these interviews, I believe, in the 50s, coming up after World War II had ended and Hitler had been defeated, because, yes, the book had been written, published in 1955. So, yeah, these interviews were done shortly, a few years after. So that's the context here. Because I do want to, because this is going to form part of the solution part of this, part of the how do we deal with these racists and extremists out here who are poisonous and violent and deadly. These are a segment of the human race that need to unlearn, need to be deprogrammed, and also need to face punishment. I mean, you need to do both. You need to put these people away, but you also need to deprogram them in the ways that you can. You do have people who used to be in these groups, who used to be these racist, people. And certainly people still have those roots embedded in them. But if you can confront them and have them unlearn this stuff, this evil, poison, unlearn these racist things, unlearn misogyny. If you can unlearn hate against the LGBTQ community, if you can deprogram these folks. I mean, like I said, you have people who used to be in the Klan who were deprogrammed and now have these, who are part of these anti-racist movements, or these movements at least to purge this hatred and violence out of these white people, particularly white men. But I want to read this from Milton Mayer. This is from the chapter in the book, They Thought They Were Free, and the chapter is called But Then It Was Too Late. Your friend, the baker, was right, said my colleague. The dictatorship and the whole process of its coming into being was, above all, diverting. It provided an excuse not to think for people who did not want to think anyway. I speak not of your little man, your baker, and so on. I speak of my colleagues and myself, learned men, mind you. Most of us did not want to think about fundamental things and never had. There was no need to. Nazism gave us some dreadful, fundamental things to think about. We were decent people and kept us so busy with continuous changes and crises and so fascinated by the machinations of the national enemies, without and within. But we had no time to think about these dreadful things that were growing little by little all around us. Unconsciously, I suppose, we were grateful. Who wants to think? To live in this process is absolutely not to be able to notice it. Please try to believe me. Unless one has a much greater degree of political awareness, acuity than most of us had ever had occasion to develop. Each step was so small, so inconsequential, so well explained, or, on occasion, regretted, that unless one were detached from the whole process from the beginning, unless one understood what the whole thing was in principle, what all these little measures that no patriotic German could resent must someday lead to. 1. No more saw it developing from day to day than a farmer in his field sees the corn growing. One day, it is over his head. That is from the chapter of the book. But then it was too late. In the book, they thought they were free by Milton Mayer. And what the German man that is being quoted by Milton Mayer there is saying is that, look, these steps were step by step in Germany. From the point of view of this German man, these things were slight. They were growing. It was never all at once. Because if it was all at once, you'd get people to rebel. Surely people would get in the streets up in arms about this. But it was done all slightly. And that's what's happening now in this country, the US. But the difference between then and now is that now people have social media accounts. Now people can share information far more quickly. Now there is online access to resources and books. Now there is an awareness out there. And now you have television and you have 24-hour cable news, for better or worse in some cases. But the point is that everybody now has information at their fingertips, and part of the problem is there's a lot of disinformation and lies that spreads, and a lot of these social media platforms, including Twitter, I might add, although they're doing a better job of late, are making it clear to people, at least as clear in a better way, that there is misinformation and lies. So when someone tweets that, there's something that usually, depending on how egregious the lie is, there will be a warning label saying this is not true, or this is where you get the facts here. This happened to Trump many times already in this summer, and that people can get suspended. His son, Don Jr., got suspended for 12 hours earlier this week for sending out some lies about coronavirus. Facebook, though, is not doing as much as it should be doing. Facebook is absolutely a joke, and I know many people use it. I've used it. Heck, I have. The Politicrat channel is on there, So there you go. My goodness me. And I should probably disband that channel off of Facebook. But the point of the matter is this, is that now we have access to all of these resources and instantaneous things. Back in 1933, you didn't. Certainly not in Germany. Although Hitler did put together a massive propaganda outfit. Goebbels, Joseph Goebbels, the minister of propaganda. I mean, the bigger the lie, right? I mean, that, and that's what Donald Trump does. Lies exponentially, lies in stereo, lies by amplification and repetition. Those are the things in the propagandistic realm. And yesterday, in the episode yesterday, I played you the conversation I had with Ruth Ben-Ghiat, who is a professor at New York University. She studies all of this. She's written extensively on it. She's a historian. She is also a professor of history and Italian studies at NYU and has written books on this. She's got a new book coming in November called Strong Men, Mussolini to the Present. I mean, that's coming out in November. I mean, this is, again, the propagandistic element of all of this as well. It's critical to the success or the failure of people like Hitler or Mussolini or Berlusconi or Donald Trump. And so this book is a must read from Milton Mayer, because it is instructive about where we are now, because a lot of what is being said in that book applies to today in the U.S. we didn't really register our outrage with the caging of brown people. It's like the Niemoller poem. First they came for, right? They came for this group, then this group, then this group. And then they came for me and there was no one left to speak for me. Because you only cared about yourself. You only cared about your protection. Oh, they're taking brown kids and separating them from their parents. Oh, well, it's not me. Oh, they're putting knees on the necks of black men and women, and they're going into black women's houses and shooting them dead in their own beds. Oh, that's not me. Oh, they're going over here and they are attacking gay people, and trans people are being killed. Black trans are being murdered all over this country. There's been at least 22 or 23 killings of trans people this year in the United States alone. Oh, well, that's the trans. I don't like the trans, so I don't care. That's what's going on, right? So that's what Niemoller, who wrote that poem back in, I think, in the 1950s, was speaking of. Oh, they're saying these things about women, and they're calling them all of these names, and you've got this lunatic Ted Yoho, this evil, cretinous person who puts his daughter up as, oh, a paragon of virtue. So, oh, because you've got a daughter now, that means that you're a virtuous man now. You're decent, huh? But then you call a congresswoman out of her name, called her these misogynistic names. Oh, but, she's a woman, or, oh, she's a Latina. She's not me, and she doesn't look like I do, so I don't care. That's the mentality we have to get rid of in this country and any other. Oh, Jo Cox. Isn't that a shame about Jo Cox? And then you go back to bed and roll over and don't think about it again. And don't have any conversation about what's going on around you, what's going on in your country. That's what this book is about. We didn't have time to think in 1933. We have time to think now in 2020. We have a pandemic that has given us lots of time to think. And Lord knows many millions of people in this country here are going through some real hardship. Some of us have always gone through hardship in this country for centuries. And we do the best we can, even with that. I'm simply saying that now you have lots of time to think. Many of you are at home. Many of you may not be at work. You may have been laid off, furloughed. Your benefits may have run out, if you have them, since the Republican Senate and the House Republicans didn't give a rat's ass. The Republicans in particular in the Senate didn't give a rat's. McConnell's up for re-election. He doesn't give a rat's. You have had plenty of time to think. You've been in the streets. You've been out there. You're still out in the streets. No matter where in the country, still these protests are happening. Don't be fooled by, oh, it's just Portland and Seattle. Oh, it's just Kentucky, Louisville. The protests are still going on in New York, man. There was a protest in New York the other day. That's when this woman got snatched up. Excuse my language, let me say it again. Trans femme, Nikki, got swept up, got absconded away with, kidnapped her. Nikki was kidnapped. And that's during a protest. These protests have not stopped. The media, as I keep saying, has stopped putting the camera on them. But they're continuing. We have to continue the education, the awareness. We have to, I think, speak to some of the older population in this country. Because I think some of the older folk have either turned their backs, said, I've done my part, or have said, I'm not interested in this. Some of them, not all of them, because we see some of the older folk on the street. And I'm talking older white folk who are on the street, whether it's in Portland, whether it's... And look, we can talk about whether or not we think that some of the folks out there are co-opting the Black Lives Matter movement. That's another story. And it's a story that's tied to this. But I have seen some of the white mothers, the wall of moms, as they're called in Portland and in other places. They're all over the country now. I have seen one or two of them at least, and that's a start, but we need more, to say this is not about me. This is about centering the lives of black people. And it's got to be about that. And it can't be about something else. It can't be about something else. And the media would love to make it about something else. And instead of having people on who are telling you that, well, it's not that bad yet because fascism isn't here yet. Or it's not that bad because, well, it's bad, but it's performative. Instead of having that kind of sentiment on TV, when, as I've said before, you go to Portland, you go to Minneapolis, you go to George Floyd's family and talk about how performative things are. You go to Breonna Taylor's family and tell them that fascism isn't here. What's more fascist than coming into someone's house and blasting them away in their sleep? But fascism's not here yet. We need education, not ignorance. And I'm not talking just the ignorance of some of these people who loudly proclaim not wearing masks. Prideful ignorance. This ignorance of I got this virus, but I got it because I had a mask on. Louis Gohmert. Or Herman Cain, who is dead now because of ignorance, quite frankly, and conscientious stupidity. And it makes me so angry, by the way, because while I had nothing in common with Herman Cain except the fact that we are both black men, what really ticks me off about that is that it could have been completely avoided. 74-year-old man. All the risk groups, 74 risk group, male risk group, black risk group. And this guy knew all of this, and he still went out there without a mask on to that rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma. When the cases were spiking, it was all over the television. Cases in Tulsa, Oklahoma have risen and shot through the roof. And that guy, 74-year-old man, still, all the risk groups he knew, and still he went without a mask. Now he's dead. It didn't have to be that way. We have to stop this culture of ignorance that has now become a mainstream thing. And look, let's face it, there's always been this championing of ignorance. Remember the demonization that you'd see in the 1970s of smart people? They were called nerds. And then people who were considered that, they embraced it, right? They turned it around and said, well, yeah, I'm a nerd. It's cool. It's sexy to be a nerd. Maybe it is. Maybe it's not. But the point is that there's been this movement toward anti-intellectualism for a long time in the United States. And what you now have is a movement to erode what truth is. Let's ignore science. Let's not follow guidelines. Let's trash the CDC guidelines on wearing a mask. Let's say that, no, coronavirus is 99% cured and it's not harmful at all. Let's say that young people don't really get it at all. They're okay. Let's say that, coronavirus cases will go down to 0. 154,000 dead people later. There has been moves like this. There has been a move for a long time to get rid of something called the truth, to get rid of the facts, to desecrate the media and say that it's fake. That's what all dictators do. That's what all fascists do. It's their prelude before they shut down the media. Talking about getting rid of TikTok. Talking about wanting to get rid of Twitter earlier in the year. Do you remember that? Wanting to get rid of these platforms. He never talks about wanting to get rid of Facebook and the kinds of things they've done. Calling the media the enemy of the people. I mean, that is a dictator talking. That's a fascist talking. And he's not acting. He's not performing. This is not a drill. What we need is education. What we need is to be the best of ourselves. What we need is to project the best of ourselves. What we need is to rebuild ourselves as human beings and educate each other and unlearn this filth that we have been lazy about, quite frankly, in this country. Over the last 60 years, we have seen that backslide. After what John Lewis and Diane Nash and Amelia Boynton and C.T. Vivian and Hosea Williams and Ralph Abernathy and Bayard Rustin and Dr. King and Coretta Scott King and Ella Baker and all of these Rosa Parks and all of the other people I've not named, Joseph Lowry, etc., James Lawson, who gave an excellent speech in the funeral service for John Lewis the other day, which one of these days I will have to have you listen to that. You can listen to it on YouTube, watch it, but you're in for a treat. He was one of the best speakers on that day after President Obama speaking. The two of them were the two best speakers by far. What they had to say was very important and impactful. But this is happening now, and we have a chance. The difference between now and 1933 is that now we have all of these tools around us. We have the benefit of history to be instructed by. History does indeed repeat itself. History can repeat itself. And I've identified so much with the idea of never again, something that Jewish people have always warned us and exhorted us. We don't want to go back to 1933 and 34 and 35 and 6, and we don't want to go back to those times. But we are sliding ever so closely to them. And as someone who I know, a Jewish person who I know, has told me, and I've said this before, told me very simply that as far as they are concerned, this is Nazi Germany right now. This is someone who has grandparents or great-grandparents who were survivors, and some who weren't survivors of what happened in these camps in Auschwitz, and during the Holocaust against Jewish people, during that onslaught, that genocide, that terror, that vile inhumanity that was absolutely enforced upon them relentlessly. Does anybody know what that meant? Do you not understand the terror, the evil of Nazis, the evil of Hitler, and what these German people did? The enslavement of black people. You kidnap black people from their land, their continent, where they were kings and queens. They had systems of science and health and agriculture and all of these things. They had businesses and towns and cities. And then you take them from that, bring them here under force, under penalty of death, and you go tell them to go build a country that you stole from somebody else, the Native Americans. And then you want to get rid of those people once you're done telling them and forcing them to build up this land for 300 plus years. Now you want to get rid of them. What kind of person are you? What kind of person is that? What kind of person is that? And then you got the descendants of these kinds of evil people. These evil people, their descendants, some of them saying, well, I wasn't around when that happened. I wasn't here when that happened. That was my ancestors. I can't be responsible for that. Well, you know what? You kind of can be if you just sit there with a response like that. You're benefiting. And every day you're silent. You're benefiting and you're complicit. As the signs say, white silence equals violence. White silence is white violence. So we've got to turn that around. You've got to turn that around. You've got to speak up. As John Lewis said in the editorial that I read out a couple of episodes ago in the New York Times. Together we can revive the soul of a nation, I believe was the title in the New York Times editorial that was published on the day of John Lewis's funeral. John Lewis had written it just a few days before he passed away. And on Thursday of this week, this week, just 2 days ago, it was released to the New York Times, July the 30th, 2020. I've read it out in full. I provided a link to it in the episode a couple of days ago. So it's left to us to fight, to stand up for what we believe in. This is where the good people in America have to stand up. And it can't just be John Lewis, who's now left us. It can't just be Admiral Vindman, Alexander Vindman, who penned an op-ed in today's Washington Post. It can't be just individuals who are in the spotlight doing this. The military, for goodness sakes, people who have spoken out from past administrations. Colin Powell has spoken out. We've had Jim Mattis, for goodness sakes, who was in this administration, Trump's administration. He spoke out, and numerous others, over the last couple of months have spoken out in The Atlantic and these other newspapers and online publications as well. It can't just be those folks. I mean, it's good to see, but we have to. We cannot be spectators to all of this. And that's what the Germans were. The Germans were spectators to these folks. And then they got on board with them quickly. They were all doing Nazi salutes before too long. Lickety-split. They were all doing Nazi salutes before too long. Lickety-split. Just like that. Democracy is fragile. Any notion of democracy is extremely fragile. So we have to wake up and rise up to our better angels. If you are still a Republican, you know that this is not right. It's not even a question of Republican and Democratic anymore. It's about what's right and what's wrong. You know in your heart that what you're seeing right now in this country is wrong. Police with their knees on the necks of black men. Police shooting, killing black women. You know that's wrong. You know that that is wrong. You know that it's evil. You know that it's wrong when you see police renditioning people, just kidnapping people on the street. That's not the country you want to live in. You know you don't. You know that that's not your country. You know that's not the kind of country you want. Well, it is your country, but you know that that's not the country that you really want to live in. And if you do want to live in that country, you want to live in your own hatred. And that's what you revel in. And then ask yourself, why do you hate? Because you've got nothing to love. Not even yourself. You have to be a better person. And this is not something that you have a cup of coffee over. Lisa Alexander in San Francisco, who had the temerity to go over to a young Filipino brother, a gay brother, and say to him, "Why are you writing that on the wall?" And he's writing Black Lives Matter. This is not your home. How dare you coming over this brother and talking about this is not his home and he doesn't live here and he doesn't own it. Why does a white person have to do something like that? Why do white people do those kinds of things? Why are some white people doing that? This is not one incident in San Francisco. There was a white woman who did this last year or the year before, calling the police on a black girl, 6 years old, selling water in front of her own apartment building. Do you not have something better to do as a white woman or anyone who does that? A couple of years before that, 2017 or 18, there was a young black man who opened up his lemonade stand, Gourmanda, whatever it's called. Victor Stevenson is the owner, black man. And he had these police roll up on him, 5 squad cars on a Sunday morning or whenever it was. Guys, guns drawn. Because someone in the neighborhood in the Mission District in San Francisco, this guy's opening up the doors of his business. I don't think he owns that. No, it's not that you don't think he owns it. It's you're angry that he owns it and you're racist. How dare a black man own this? So I'm going to call the cops because I'm a racist. That's what's really going on in your head, isn't it? And yeah, cops coming up. That's the country that you are happy with coexisting in? A country where almost 150,000 people, in fact, more than that, over 154,000 people dead. That's the country you're happy whistling along in while people are dying next to you and you won't put a mask on? That's the kind of thing that's got to turn around here. That's the kind of thing. Behaviors like that. You just don't want to put a mask on. You don't want to think. You don't want to act. And freedom to you means being lazy. Freedom to you means you don't want to lift the finger to do anything. You're selfish. We have to do a whole lot better. You have to do a whole lot better. And if you see this kind of garbage, and I'm not talking about the mask stuff, you've got people who are violent about that. You've got people in Manhattan, in New York City, in Manhattan, at a Trader Joe's, employees telling people to wear a mask, these 2 men. And these 2 men attacked 8 Trader Joe's employees. Simply because, well, there's not a because in it. The Trader Joe's employees were saying to them, wear a mask. It's our policy. See over here, here's the sign. And then they got attacked, 8 of them. A few of whom had to go to hospital. This is not the country you really want to live in, is it? Is it? This October and November, you can choose, right? If you want to live in a country that continues to do this and is now full scale, blatantly in your face, doing some of the very things that happened in Nazi Germany. They haven't put people in ovens yet. But like this guy, Tom Nichols, says, well, fascism isn't here yet. It's not here yet. Do you want to wait until they start putting people in ovens? To then go, oh yeah, it's here. Is that what you want? This October and November, if you're an early voter, if you're a mail-in voter, do not delay. Put your ballot in the mail immediately when you get it because of this postal shortage. Or vote early. As I have said repeatedly, 40 states at least, about 38 states plus out of the 50, have early voting. You can go in person vote early. Either one will do. Even in a pandemic, voting early is not the worst thing, trust me. At least you know that it's been received, your vote's been received. Speaking of voting, I'm going to come back and talk about 2 more states. Next. Welcome back. 2 more states. First of all, Illinois. That's where we're up to on the 50 states. I do at least 2 of these a day, sometimes more, as we head toward the Democratic National Convention this month. By then, or at least maybe the first or second day of that convention, which is going to start, believe it or not, in just 16 days. My goodness. By then, I will have completed all 50 states pretty much, and the territory, and then the District of Columbia as well. And then there'll be some more information that I'll be sharing about all of these places and having this information put in one place for you to look at. And that will give you plenty of time to examine and mull over and examine your plans and have a plan right now to vote, as we are now in August. Illinois. For those of you voting in Illinois, please pay attention to the following. If you want to register to vote, then you want to go to this website, elections.il.gov. That's elections.il.gov. You will come to a page that says Illinois State Board of Elections. What you then do is scroll down and you'll see all of this information. It's straightforward. You'll see all these things, information for voters, all these categories across the top of the page. You scroll down a little bit, you see voter services. And underneath voter services, the first thing you will see is online voter registration. Click on that. That will bring you to a new web page, and it is the online voter registration application website. And then you scroll to the bottom and you register there. To apply to register, do that there. By the way, the deadline to register to vote in Illinois is October the 18th. That's for the 2020 general election. The last day to register is October the 18th for that November 3rd general election. Do not wait till October the 18th. You want to register now. Register today. I'm kind of reluctant to give out the voter registration deadline because human nature being as it is, we procrastinate, many of us, or some of us do, and we will wait until the 18th. And I'm telling you, that's not a good idea. Not a good idea at all. So at the very bottom of that page, you start the online voter registration application. If you're someone who just wants to check whether you're registered, there is a link that you will see just above the online voter registration link that is at the bottom of that page. And the link just above the bottom of that page is called the voter registration lookup. You click on that, it's in blue, and then you can just look up your registration. It takes you to a page where you can do that. So that's Illinois. Pretty straightforward there. Pretty straightforward. It really is. You go again to elections.il.gov. You scroll down just a little bit. On your left side, you will see voter services. And then you go underneath voter services to online voter registration. You click on that. You're taken to the online voter registration application website. And again, you will see these 2 links at the bottom of the page. One of them will say before you begin, and then it will have voter registration lookup in blue text. You click on that to see to check your registration, and you should check it once a week, every week through the end of October. And then if you have never registered before or want to register to vote in Illinois, you start the online voter registration application, which is at the very bottom of that same page. Click on that and away you go. That's Illinois. It's really, really straightforward. I'll be back with the second of the 2 states that I want to talk about for voting. That's Indiana. Next. Welcome back. Indiana is the next state. And by the way, before I go to Indiana, I just want to mention that there is early voting in Illinois. I forgot to mention that Illinois early voting begins there on October the 19th for that November 3rd general election. So keep a note and make a note of that, folks. If you are in Illinois, the early voting for Illinois for the November 3rd general election begins on October the 19th of this year. Now on to Indiana. And the way to get, I think the best way to get to the Indiana information, if you are a voter in Indiana, is to go to www.in, that's in.gov/SOS/elections. That is, I think, the best way and the quickest way to get to the information you need. So it's maybe a bit more of a web address than you want. And there may be other web addresses that you can get to quicker, but this one, in.gov/SOS Sam Oscar Sam /elections. That will bring you to the election division page, and you will see vote by mail. You can request to vote absentee by mail in the election, and then it's got an area where you can click for more instructions on that. But on your left-hand side is what you want to look at as well. There's something underneath the election division tab called voter information. You want to click on that tab. It's the second one below election division. Voter information. Click on voter information, then it brings you to a page that says register to vote. So you will see that in front of you, there is a tab that says register to vote. You can click on that. You click on register to vote. And then you see the information. Now you have to scroll a little bit to get it, because it first says voter registration. It then tells you you have the right to vote if, and it gives you the guidelines. And then you keep scrolling down and you'll see register to vote online. So actually the quicker way is to go to indianavoters.com. So if you click on indianavoters.com, or if you enter that, or indianavoters.in.gov, you will be taken immediately to the voter portal. So I should have said that first. indianavoters.in.gov. And that brings you to the voter portal. You will see 5 blue rectangular boxes. One of them will say, on the first one on the left, it will say register to vote. Then the one next to it will say check voting status, which is really check your voting registration record. And that also means check to see if you're registered. That's what that means as well. So you can register to vote by clicking on the register to vote box. And then if you are someone who is registered and want to make sure that you still are, you check the box next to it that says check voting status. You click on that and then put your information in, and they will be able to, you go from there, and then you'll be able to find out what's what. So that's Indiana in a nutshell, really. It really is. Fairly straightforward, pretty much. I mean, the website not as clear and clean as the Hawaii one was that I did yesterday, but nonetheless important. It does bring you to where you need to be. For Indiana, they have set out the deadline to receive an absentee ballot application is the 22nd of October. Now, again, We're seeing chicanery with the mail, and we're going to be talking some more about that as I've been doing and as others have been doing. But that's on the Indiana election calendar, and there are some phone numbers there. 317-232-3939, 800-622-4941. You can look into that if you're an Indiana voter and get more information. I believe there's also photo ID in Indiana rather. And so you need to look into that as well. If you are a voter, you want to make sure you are familiar with the rules of your state when you're voting, because you do not want to go to the polls and then you don't have the photo ID, or that you do not have the correct photo ID. I mean, this is what voter suppression is, when you're telling people they've got to show you IDs, and not just an ID, but this exact one. In some states, you can have a hunting license, and that's good enough. A hunting license is good enough, but not your own state ID, not your student ID, not sometimes even, depending on which, your certain driver's license may not be allowed. Well, it usually is allowed. But students aren't allowed to vote with their student ID, but a hunter with a gun, oh, that person can vote with the ID that they've got. I mean, come on, this is so discriminatory. It's so obvious. So you're looking largely at mostly white male, and white female, but mostly white male individuals who hunt. And there are black people who hunt, there are Asian. I mean, but I'm just saying, in a state like Indiana, where they, by the way, nearly lynched a black man, and they really forget that either, by the way, that in Indianapolis, or wherever it was, Burlington, or wherever it was in Indiana, I forget where, just a few weeks ago, remember, this video of that brother who was a councilman, or an assemblyman, for goodness sakes. Black man who was tied to a tree, and if it wasn't for some white people or people who came along and found these racist Yahoo white guys saying back off, these are racists, these are people in these organizations, these hate groups, who are saying back off, we're going to do what we're going to do. And he was there with his friends, this black man. If it wasn't for his white friends persisting and getting other people to come in and video it and do all this other stuff and keep the heat on, they were forced to release him. Otherwise, forget it. He would have been lynched. The deadline again for voter registration in Indiana is October the 5th. Do not wait until then. Register now. Register now. I'm not so sure that there is early voting in Indiana. I'm looking here at it, and well, yeah, maybe there is. Maybe there is. October 6th, first day that a voter may vote an absentee ballot in the office of the court. Okay, yeah, that is early voting. That's what early voting is. It looks like October 6th in Indiana is the first day that you can vote early. So that means that you can cast an absentee ballot in the office of the county, of the satellite office of the circuit court clerk. So there you go. So there is early voting. October 6th is when it begins. So there you have it. That's Indiana. And that is the end of the episode for this day. I want to say thank you very much for listening. And again, I really thank you for listening to any or all of this episode or any episode of The Politicrat. I want you to know that I truly appreciate your time. I really do, and your input, and I appreciate you following me on Twitter at The Popcorn, REEL. And I also want to say thank you as well for being loyal listeners and for telling people about this podcast. And also, finally, I do want to say, please subscribe. please subscribe to this podcast. There's a range of conversations and issues and guests that you will be hearing here. We've had quite a cross-section of guests and will continue to, talking about very important issues, and there will be some more lighthearted moments. But this podcast is geared toward talking about issues and issues to educate, to have people think about things and to act and to do things that are positive to affect change. Everybody has a role to play. We all do, myself, you, and we all do it in our own way, however large or small. It doesn't have to be this grand gesture. It has to be a gesture that you can do. It has to be something that positively affects and changes, so that we can have a future and a country and a world, most importantly, that we can leave to future generations that will be thankful that we actually stood up and did something. Because we have future generations that are going to come along, and they are going to want to be in a world that is better than the one we're in now, and certainly in a country that's better than the one we are in now. So for those of you who don't want to change anything, who are quite content that 154,000 people and counting, maybe double that right now, quite frankly, in this country have lost their lives to a Trump virus, and you're just sitting there not wearing a mask, I think you should reevaluate. And if you have children, if you have grandparents, if you have parents, think about your impact on them. Think about that. You may not care, but there are people who do, and I'm sure your grandparents do, and your parents might, and your children might. I think they would care. Thank you very much for listening to this edition of The Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore.